Something I was asked very early on when I started this channel is what materials should I look to use as a starting armourer. So I'm going to make certain assumptions with this. You're a beginning armourer, you're making the armour to be used for standard reenactment, so light contact but certainly not competition work. If you're going to get into competition fighting, you need a different material, generally to mild steel. For the most part, apart from the helmet. Some people prefer mild steel for the helmet, but considerably thicker than what we're going to be using here. So I'm just making an assumption that you're a starting armourer, not too certain which materials to use, and you're going to start with a mild steel. Now, the starting measurement I tend to use on all of these is you have the gauge, the estimate, the actual size in millimetres. So the starting one is 16 gauge. I like to start with that one if you can't remember your way around the gauges, because 16 gauge is about 1.6 millimetres, and it works really well as 1/16 of an inch as well. 14 gauge. I go that way first, just remember the 4, add 0.4 of a millimetre, and you end up with 2 millimetres. We'll come down to 18 gauge and take away those 4 millimetres, and you end up with about 1.2 millimetres. Now bear in mind, these are estimates. Okay, if you're engineers, you're looking to do more than just a bit of armouring, then you need to consider these measurements more properly, which we'll get to in a little bit. Now 16 gauge, use that for your joints, so your knees and your elbows, for your van braces and your rear braces, main parts of gauntlets perhaps, cuisse, those sorts of things. Things where you've got a reasonably large plate. It's going to take a reasonable knock in reenactment circumstances, so where you're not looking to particularly injure or knock each other over, you're just having some fun with your friends and portraying various bits and pieces to the public. Okay, so 16 gauge for those bits. 18 gauge tend to use for lames, in shoulders, in the elbows and joints, and wrap plates on the legs, that sort of thing. Wrap plates there, and maybe fingers. A bit thick for fingers. Tend to use 20 gauge, but fingers as well, just on this chart. 14 gauge tends to be for the helms, the breastplate and a placket. And while we're doing that, tend to make back plates out of 16 or even 18, depending on the type. Okay, so to summarise then, once again, 16 gauge is 1.6 mil or 1/16 of an inch, and is good for the van brace, rear brace, cuisse, and the joints such as the polling and the cutter. 18 gauge works well for the lames with those joints, wrap plates on the legs, fingers maybe in gauntlets, certainly Italian gauntlets, that sort of thing. The fingers on those are quite well with 18 gauge, and possibly back plates somewhere between the two. And 14 gauge is great for helmets when you're starting out, because you can stretch the material quite aggressively and you'll have enough left over to withstand normal reenactment use if you've been relatively careful. And you can certainly grind away on it and all that sort of business to clean it up as you're learning the trade. Breastplates and plackets, good ones to make from heavy gauge, simply because people are going to be struck there with relative force if they're playing nicely in reenactment. Now the actual measurements for these, if you're interested, are about 1.98, 1.59, this is all in millimetres, and 1.27, just to give you your actual measurements there. But you can see those estimates are good enough for this sort of work. So there you go, a quick rundown on the gauges and materials, what those estimates are in real measurements, and the sort of things they can be used for. This bit really is down to your own personal choice, but this is what I found has worked safely for standard reenactment use when the customer wants mild steel. Thanks for watching.